Zach Wilson remains in the starting lineup for the Jets, at least for now. Is it the right move? We'll discuss today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Wednesday, November 8th, 2023, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to this show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. If you enjoy the show and are watching on YouTube, give this episode a big thumbs up. These things help us out and help other Jets fans find the show. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Well, today we have our weekly mailbag show. Thanks to everybody who sent in questions. Each Wednesday we try and do a mailbag with listener questions. And our first question is, unsurprisingly, about the offense. It's about Zach Wilson. Hey, John, why do you think Saleh is sticking with Zach Wilson? Why doesn't Trevor Siemian start a couple of games, and let's see what happens? I know most of the players on offense are atrocious, but at least quarterback is one of the positions we could possibly upgrade. What could Saleh still see in him? I'd like to hear your thoughts on this because I have nothing. And that question was from Drew. My feelings on this are kind of nuanced. I think there's no question Zach Wilson's not getting the job done. If you look statistically, almost every major category, he's at or near the bottom of the NFL. I know we've talked about, improvements, and he's better than he was a year ago, but at some point that ceases to mean a whole lot. Zach Wilson was so bad a year ago that he could be better, and that still could not be good enough. And that's really the case with the New York Jets right now. Zach Wilson's a bad quarterback. I think he's played badly enough to merit a benching. And I don't think it's all Zach Wilson's fault. And I talked about this on yesterday's show when I recapped the Jets' loss to the Chargers. I hate this idea that, you have to pick Zach Wilson or everybody else. And saying Zach Wilson is bad means that you're saying, everybody else is not a problem. Or saying everybody else is a problem means you're saying Zach Wilson is not bad. The problems are all of the above with the Jets. And I don't think that, just because it's impossible to fix all the problems, that you should just ignore problems that you can fix. If you have 5 problems and you can fix one, you should try and fix one. The issue I have with this is Trevor Siemian is not a good quarterback. He's awful. Maybe I should not be that blunt, but I don't think Trevor Siemian's really going to fix your team. As shaky as Zach Wilson is, I don't know that Trevor Siemian's going to be better. Now, what I will say is the Jets' offense is so bad right now that you're at a point where it might be worth it to make a move just to shake things up for the sake of just changing things, because it can't get any worse. They've scored 3 offensive touchdowns the last 4 games. And by the way, those 3 touchdowns were all one-play drives where Breece Hall took either a run or a pass to the end zone. And one of those 3, the Eagles essentially let him score. That was the play late in the fourth quarter that gave the Jets the lead after Tony Adams' interception, and the Eagles essentially decided, let's let him score, let's get the ball back because the Jets are going to take the lead anyway. So really, for all intents and purposes, 2 touchdowns that were both a Breece Hall big play. So the offense is so bad right now. I can live with it if they decided to make a change. The issue is that Trevor Siemian's bad, and I think that the analogy I might use is back when you were in school, if you did not study for a test, you failed the test, it was not because you answered the questions wrong on that day. It's because you did not prepare yourself for the test. And when I look at the way the Jets handled the quarterback position, both in the offseason and then even a little bit after Aaron Rodgers went down, I look at this and I say, Siemian's a really bad alternative. He's so bad that you may stick with Zach Wilson. But how did we get to this point? That's really the issue, is the fact that you don't have a better alternative than Trevor Siemian right now. By the way, Siemian should be up on the active roster. He should not be inactive on game days, because I'm sure he's better than Tim Boyle. And even though I'm not sure he's better than Zach Wilson, I think he's at least close enough that if Zach Wilson has a bad game, you may just put him in relief put Simeon in out of the bullpen to try and spark the offense or do something, because I do think Simeon potentially could spark the offense over a short period of time. But the fact he's the best alternative for the Jets right now, that's a pretty glaring comment about how poorly Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh handled this quarterback position. And the thing that I go back to that just makes no sense to me is the reason Aaron Rodgers was traded for is the Jets felt Zach Wilson could not be their quarterback this year. So why would you leave yourself in a position when there were quality options, affordable quality options as far as backup quarterbacks go? Why would you leave yourself in a position where you're one play from needing to go back to Zach Wilson? None of this makes a whole lot of sense. In fact, I mean, I hate to be like a conspiracy theorist, but in a situation where the moves make so little sense, you almost wonder like whether this is a situation where the Jets were afraid they'd get criticism if they made Zach Wilson the number 3 quarterback. It's almost as though they were afraid that, if they made Zach Wilson the number 3 quarterback, people would be saying, well, you're admitting he's a bust. And the problem with something like this is when you start thinking in this way, and NFL teams definitely do think in this way. I mean, I can't say for sure whether the Jets do, but I do know that NFL teams have done this in the past where they're more afraid of being accused of making a mistake than they are of just admitting the mistake. And you have to be honest. You have to honestly assess your players. I don't think the Jets have done that with Zach Wilson. I think that they gambled. They traded for Rodgers, and I think like it's almost like the Jets' mindset was, well, if you get Aaron Rodgers, everybody's going to understand why you play him. Nobody's going to say you're giving up on Zach Wilson. I mean, you get Aaron Rodgers, you got to play Aaron Rodgers, right? And you can't really say we're giving up on Zach Wilson if he's the number 2 quarterback behind Aaron Rodgers. It's almost like that was the mindset, because that's the only thing that I can figure out. The Jets, the way they've handled this backup quarterback position, that makes no sense. And to me, the issue is not a failure to bench Zach Wilson for Trevor Siemian. The issue is they have done such a poor job both in the offseason and now. And Saleh even kind of admitted it after Rodgers went down, that he said the number one thing that they were looking for in a backup was somebody who was going to buy into the idea Zach Wilson was the starter. So I think there was even maybe a little tacit admission that this was the case. The Jets left themselves in this position. They didn't need to be here. Look, it's very difficult. I don't think there's a team in the NFL that's going to feel great about their starting quarterback going down 4 plays into the season. It's a difficult thing to overcome. But with the defense the Jets have, the Jets are built better than a lot of teams to be able to withstand that. They should have better quarterback play. I mean, look, the offensive line's also a mess. The receiver position's a mess. We'll get to that in a bit. The offensive coordinator's not doing a good job. I mean, they're two good players on this offense right now. But the quarterback's definitely part of the problem. He may be taking too much of the grief, but he's definitely part of the problem. And I don't understand why there's no better option to throw out there. And Robert Saleh, if you listened to Michael Kay's show yesterday, did not really offer any sort of explanation for what the Jets are doing at quarterback. I mean, he didn't even defend the decision to stick with Zach Wilson. So lots of puzzling stuff going around with the Jets on their coaching staff and at the quarterback position. But there's also some puzzling stuff going on at the wide receiver position. As we continue this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets, we're going to turn our attention there. We're going to talk about Allen Lazard. How did this guy end up being the Jets' number 2 receiver? Well, the answer might be simpler than you think, and it may not be the answer you want to hear, but I'll give it to you anyway as we continue this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Gametime. You should not have to worry when you're buying tickets to the next big event. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. The Gametime app is super easy to use. In the summer, I actually used it to buy tickets to the U.S. Open tennis event in New York. I bought them last minute. It was so simple. A lot of these other ticket sites have all these extra steps you need to go through. Not Gametime. It's remarkably easy. It's remarkably convenient, and they find you the best tickets available. You should know that Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event, and even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find last-minute seats, and you can find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. I know the Jets aren't playing all that well, but Vegas is an exciting trip. That's where the Jets are heading this weekend for a Sunday night game against the Raiders. Tickets are hard to come by. They're very expensive. Gametime will help you find the best deals. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, one word with no space, for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. Big shout out to everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. We continue with our weekly mailbag now. Our next question, John, why is Allen Lazard the number 2 receiver on this team? Well, the simple answer for this is obvious. Aaron Rodgers. I referred to it the day Allen Lazard signed with the Jets. I referred to it as kind of like the Aaron Rodgers tax, where the Jets were very focused on getting Aaron Rodgers this offseason, and I don't know if they promised him that they'd sign his favorite receivers, but there are a lot of people who are here right now, at least in part because of Aaron Rodgers. One of them is Nathaniel Hackett, Rodgers' preferred offensive coordinator. One's Allen Lazard, not doing so well. One's Randall Cobb, doing even worse. One's Billy Turner, maybe the worst of all of them. I mean, as hard as I've been on Cobb, I think I've called Cobb like the worst player in the NFL. Billy Turner may have one-upped Cobb for what he did on Monday night against the Chargers. It's not looking good right now for the guys Aaron Rodgers brought in. And that was part of the price of getting Rodgers. And I think you really do have to wonder whether it was worth it. Over the course of the offseason, people were really hyping Lazard up. And I did not really understand it because if you watch the film of what he did in Green Bay, this is kind of the player he always was. I mean, he was never super productive. Last year, he was the number 1 receiver, and he did not even crack 800 yards. Now, he missed a couple games. He only played 15 games out of the 17, so I guess he would have if he'd stayed healthy. But you look at the target share he got, the numbers he posted were not that impressive. And he was pretty much the go-to guy in Green Bay. It did not produce all that much, but it was a bigger-bodied receiver. So, you don't expect him to be sudden. You don't expect him to create a ton of separation. But you do, as a bigger receiver, expect him to be a very difficult guy to cover in contested catch situations. But he's not. I mean, he's easy to move off the spot. He doesn't come down with passes in traffic. And that's a problem. If you don't create separation and you can't win the ball, win contested catches, you're not offering a whole lot as a receiver. I think he produces enough that you can argue when he was a non-drafted free agent signing, not making any money, he's probably an asset for a team. But at $11 million a year, it's not doing the job. And, when we talk about guys who could be benched, Lazard's so bad that I think you'd be justified benching him based on performance. The problem is, who do you put in there? Do you put Cobb in there more? I mean, I guess maybe Xavier Gibson could earn a few more snaps, but I mean, Xavier Gibson had 2 catches in this game. There just aren't very many good options. But back to what the Jets did in the offseason. I mean, they just decided to go all in on Aaron Rodgers. And this is the results. I mean, it's not just, you weren't just getting Rodgers. One of the things that you can't really separate Rodgers from these other guys who are here, because these guys would not be here without Rodgers. And the Jets, whether it was formal or whether it was informal, they built their roster really thinking about the guys Rodgers wanted here. I'm not saying they necessarily told Rodgers he could pick his guys, but a lot of guys are here because of Aaron Rodgers. And I think you have to say that as a talent evaluator, he's a great quarterback, but sometimes the great players are not the greatest talent evaluators. See LeBron James, some of the players that his teams through the years have brought in the NBA because of his recommendation. This has not gone well for the Jets, all these Aaron Rodgers guys. And if you look at the whole package, I think you do have to question it a little bit. I guess maybe part of the hype Lazard got this offseason was people were tired of Corey Davis and they just assumed that Lazard would be better because he wasn't Corey Davis. I don't know, but it's not a good situation. And I think Lazard's showing you what he is. I mean, this should not have been a surprise to you if you were paying attention to Allen Lazard. It's not, it's just a bad situation right now. I mean, I don't know if there's anything else you can say about it. Next question, John. What exactly do you think Nathaniel Hackett is trying to establish as this team's offensive identity? It really did not make sense to me the way he was overly aggressive running tempo and empty sets on 3rd and short, then ultimately transitioning to ultra-conservative 3 tight end sets later on. It just doesn't appear that there's any semblance of a strategy involved in those game plans. I think he's just trying to throw everything at the wall and seeing what works, because the team doesn't have anything that's working right. I think he's trying to find something. And I think like the tempo thing, I think he read the media too much. I think he was reading too many articles. He's listening to, I don't know, talk radio or podcast, because that was a big thing last week. I think he maybe got bullied into running the tempo by the media, because the big thing last week was, well, Zach Wilson's looking so good in hurry up situations. So therefore, the Jets should run tempo. It's not that simple. If it was that easy of a fix, it would have been done already. There are reasons to run tempo. I mean, when you run no huddle, it means the defense can't sub guys in and out. So maybe if you get a couple first downs, you get on a roll, you can tire them out. It also means you don't have to face as many different personnel packages, which makes the pre-snap stuff easier to identify because you don't have to figure out who's running on the field, who's not, who's running off the field. The other thing that makes it simpler is because you're going up tempo, defensive coaches don't have this time to communicate in complex play calls. So you tend to face more base defenses, which is easier for a young quarterback. So, I mean, look, there are arguments to be made for running tempo, but the idea that this was going to fix everything that was wrong with the Jets, and I saw that in some places in the media last week, it just wasn't realistic. And part of the reason I think Zach Wilson had success in the 2-minute drill is by nature, defenses tend to back off a little bit because the clock is their ally. So even if they're not technically playing prevent, and of course against the Giants they were, but in the fourth quarter of that game, but even if they're not technically playing prevent, they're essentially trying to trade time. They're more willing to trade yardage for time than they are in normal situations. I think that sometimes that's to the defense's detriment. I think defenses should really be more aggressive. I don't think they should be as passive as they are in 2-minute drills, but also in the 2-minute drill, the same thing goes for the offense. The offense doesn't have as many plays because, again, you don't have the time to communicate things. They can't be as complex because you essentially just have to get up to the line and go. So you only have a handful of plays you can run. And, over the course of that can work in a 2-minute drill, but over the course of a long game, you need a lot of different plays. So maybe you can master a few simple plays in the 2-minute drill, but I don't know that you can do it over the course of a long game. I think he's just trying to find anything that works, though. I mean, it's tough to have an identity when you can't really do anything well. And that's the real challenge. And look, I think Hackett's done a horrible job this year. I did not like the hire at the time. I think that there are lots of issues with the way he calls these games. I think the offense is way too predictable. I think that the situational play calling has been very suspect. I mean, for as much as people complained about Michael LaFleur got run out of town he didn't do half of the stuff wrong that Hackett's done. There are a lot of problems I have with this offense, but it's tough. I mean, there's only there really are two good offensive players on this team, Garrett and Brees. Those are the two guys who bring much to the table. And, there's not a lot you can do. I think Hackett's just trying to find some formula that he can stick with, because once you find at least you find something that can be your bread and butter, something you can do in any situation. It gives you a basis to run an offense. The Jets don't have that right now. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, could Aaron Rodgers eventually be back? It would be unexpected. He's making some noise about it. We don't really know what's going to happen, but we'll talk about it in more detail as we continue this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by DoorDash. Sunday night, the Jets play the Raiders. The game is in Las Vegas. It's a great time to just kick back with a great meal. You don't have to prepare it, though. You want it delivered directly to you, and that's where DoorDash comes in. DoorDashers will bring you a fantastic dinner as you get ready to watch the Jets try and win a game. And there are so many great restaurants in the New York area you can order from. Take Bonaro. Chef Albert DeMeglio opened this South Williamsburg restaurant in 2016 with a menu tailored to invoke the kinds of dishes his grandmother cooked for the family. His calling card is fresh mozzarella, handmade daily and served smoked or salted with extra virgin olive oil. He also prepares Old Country giardiniera, spicy pickled cauliflower, onions, celery, and more that can go on anything, notably a burger with mozzarella. This and so many different options, so many great options are available in the New York area using DoorDash. And you can get up to 50% off a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCKED23. Subject to change, terms apply. Don't forget to use code LOCKED23. It's one word with no space, LOCKED, number 3, for 50% off up to a $10 value on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and spend $15 or more. Subject to change, terms apply. This is the Locked On Jets podcast. On this Wednesday, we're doing our weekly mailbag show. We continue with a question about Aaron Rodgers. John, do you think Aaron Rodgers is close to a return? We get bits and pieces of his injury status. It seems highly unlikely. So is this just the Jets keeping things interesting, or do you think there's a real chance he plays if we stay in the playoff hunt? It's a great question. We actually talked about this on last week's mailbag. And since then, We've heard more. Rodgers is talking about it. I'll be back in a few weeks. He said that to Derwin James Monday night. And, if you watch the Pat McAfee show, he's hinting at, maybe he'll be back this year. It's tough to say. I mean, I think common sense would tell you probably not. I think, first of all, the Jets have to stay in the playoff race. And that's not a guarantee right now. This was a really tough loss the Jets had to the Chargers. If they fall out of the playoff race, it's going to be difficult. I'm not a doctor. I've spoken with people who know this stuff. I know Rodgers is warming up pregame. I mean, for everything I know, it's one thing for him to be kind of just like moving around on the field. It's another to say that you feel comfortable, and you have to remember, this is the NFL, that you feel comfortable in a game situation, a tackle football with, 300-pound guys bearing down on you, 300-pound guys hitting you. Would you feel comfortable enough in the Achilles to put him out there in that situation? It's tough to say. I mean, the one thing I will say is modern medicine is just, it's unbelievable, the advances that have been made. So, I mean, look, nobody knows except Rodgers and the team doctors. Would it put it past the Jets to kind of float that, to try and keep the team relevant in the news discussion? I think anything is possible. Would I put it past the Jets to just kind of keep the team motivated? I mean, I think it can be a motivator. On Friday, we had Thomas Morstead on the show. He talked about the idea. He kind of mentioned the idea of Rodgers potentially coming back is exciting the team. So maybe it's one of those things. Maybe it could happen. I don't know. I mean, if it does happen, is it a great idea? I think that's an open discussion. I mean, I think back to 1997, which is when the great receiver Jerry Rice tore his ACL week 1. He came back late that season and immediately re-injured himself. And he was trying to rush himself back. And he later admitted that, he probably made a mistake trying to come back too soon from a serious injury, got himself hurt later that season. I mean, it was amazing. He got back that season from a torn ACL. But, I mean, it's one thing for Rodgers to be able to move around. It's another for it to be a good idea to put him on the field, which I don't really know yet. My general philosophy, though, remains that I will hope for the best, but I'll believe Rodgers is on the field when I see Rodgers on the field, because this is a really tough injury to come back from. And even if he's ready to go, I mean, I don't know what kind of state he's going to be in. Is he going to be 100%? Is he going to be able to play effectively? This is not a good offensive line. I think we've established this offensive line is a little shaky. And listen, even if he's ready to be on the field, this is an injury that really deals a blow to your mobility. And Rodgers at this point of his career was not a super mobile guy anyway. So there's a lot to consider here. And I mean, if you're the Jets heading into next season, do you want to risk Rodgers next season for a team this year that, even with him may not be a real contender? Tough to say. I think for it to happen, the Jets will need to start winning some games, though. I know they won 3 of their last 4, but they need to stay in the playoff race for this to even be a consideration. And our last question: how many good players would have to be added to make this a good team? A star quarterback, a star receiver, and a good tackle. The team is good. The team is not good. The team is good. The team is not good. What do you think? Well, it's kind of weird because the defense is tremendously built. This is an excellent. There's no weakness on the defense except maybe safety. I mean, I think Tony Adams is very inconsistent at safety. Tony Adams at safety reminds me of what Quincy Williams was at linebacker in 2021 and 2022, where he's in a part of a lot of big plays. Sometimes he's making a fantastic play, and sometimes the big play is going for the other team because he whiffs on a tackle. And hopefully that gets better. That's actually a little bit more damaging at safety than it is at linebacker for a guy to be inconsistent, because when Quincy Williams whiffed at linebacker his first 2 years with the Jets, at least there was a guy behind him. When you're the safety of the last line of defense. So, but outside of that, I mean, how can you complain about this defense? I mean, the corners 1, 2, 3 are fantastic. Defensive line, Jermaine Johnson, Bryce Huff having huge season. John Franklin Myers playing well. Quinnen Williams still excellent. And the linebackers, Quincy Williams, one of the best linebackers in the NFL, and C.J. Mosley finally delivering like what the Jets were expecting when they signed him all those years ago. I mean, it's been like 4 years of C.J. Mosley where he's buried between being okay and not being on the field, and now he's finally, I think, delivering. This is C.J. Mosley's best season with the Jets. But on offense, you only have 2 good players. What did the Jets need? They need a better quarterback, of course. But beyond that, I mean, I think you'd want a number 1 receiver. I think maybe you'd want 2 to 3 offensive linemen. That's not easy. I mean, there's only 11 guys on the offense. So we're talking a quarterback. I guess they'll get Rodgers back, but then a receiver, 2 to 3. So, and what are they, 4 to 5 players away on offense? I mean, you could talk about being to be a Super Bowl team. I think that's what they need. Not so easy. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on the podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, give this episode a big thumbs up. These things help us out, help other Jets fans find the show. Have a great Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.